Story 1. I met a billionaire who loved carpentry and the Old West. So he built himself an entire western town in the middle of nowhere in northern Arizona, complete with a saloon, jail, general store, and several houses. He would throw parties for himself and his friends. The town had 6 or 7 buildings on both sides. I do not know anything else about this person. This happened when I was a kid. After writing this, I will ask my stepmom if she remembers him. Story 2. I once had a billionaire clean up after me. He owned a racing car team, among other things. I was a carpenter working on his summer home, making a mess while milling flooring for the living room, and the owner started sweeping up. I told him I was going to make a much bigger mess and that it was pointless to try to clean up before the worst was done. He told me to come and find him when I was finished, and he would clean up. I thought, yeah, right? I'm going to tell the billionaire homeowner to come clean up. But as soon as I started tidying up, a hand came from the side and grabbed the broom out of my hand. You have better things to do. I can clean this up, he insisted, and he took over. I had a lot of respect for him. Story 3. Chill, lisp, moderate alcoholic. His first wife was great, and then he married his secretary, who was also a wonderful woman. The two women are still friends. He once explained to me how he buys politicians. It's essentially investing a few $1,000s at the beginning of their careers, followed by additional investments for those who keep winning. Regular dinners and phone calls create the feeling of being an old friend from when they were just getting started. Those who fail get discarded. Overall, you might invest about $20,000 in the losers and perhaps $150,000 in the winners. To have 20 politicians in your pocket requires no more than $8 million. That's small change for a billionaire, and each politician believes they are your friend. They pick up the phone not because of the money, but because they always respond to an old friend who supported them when no one else did. Story 4. I had an uncle who was a chief suite executive for a very large, well-known company. He was a bit arrogant, but he came from nothing, having been raised in foster homes, and worked his way up in a traditional storybook style from entry-level position to executive. So, I think he somewhat deserved the arrogance that accompanied his success. What irked me about him was his peculiar way of speaking, which left you unsure of what was serious and what was not. I always felt guarded around him to the point where, even when he was explaining a generous graduation proposal involving moderate effort for a lot of money, I wasn't really sure if he actually meant it or if it was some kind of mind game. Most of the conversations with him felt like mind games. Story 5. I attended a private college preparatory school that put my parents in debt. We are upper middle class, but I was easily the least wealthy student in my class. The students whose parents earned their money were very nice people, while those from generational wealth were often unkind to me. There were genuinely no exceptions to this rule. Story 6. I had a good friend who was very wealthy through marriage, but also fairly affluent before that. I met him through work and we were quite close. Our families began spending time together as we started having children. They were enjoyable and our families liked hanging out, but eventually the differences in lifestyle became awkward. I was relatively okay with it, but my wife, having grown up in difficult circumstances, really struggled with it. They were generous, always inviting us to go to professional sports events and glamping trips. They would show up with their extended family in luxury recreational vehicles, while we would be lucky to have an older RV that was just new enough to be allowed into the RV park. It was somewhat embarrassing. We would joke about it, but as gracious as they tried to be, it was still a bit uncomfortable. We struggled to keep up with the expenses of those outings, even when they provided us with free tickets. In the end, it created a divide we couldn't fully overcome, and we eventually drifted apart. It was really sad. At work, we were like brothers and laughed our way through years of our job. I miss him. Story 7. I grew up around quite a few influential individuals. The son of NVIDIA's chief executive officer was a childhood friend, along with the families of several early employees of modern-day technology giants. They were pretty normal, honestly. They didn't dress or act any differently than an average middle-class person. They drove unassuming, sensible vehicles. But then you see their estate and neighborhood, and it really sinks in that they live in an entirely different world. Story 8. Jack Nicholson's lawyer. You passed the tennis courts on the drive up to the house after entering the gate. He was married to his third wife, who was in her 30s, and they had a young child together. He was in his 70s. Story 9. The woman I remember lived in Florida, and my grandfather was friends with her. She was about 75 or 80 years old at the time. She was afraid of many things, including thunderstorms. I felt so bad for her. Despite having the wealth to enjoy life on a grand scale, she was too afraid to truly live. She was also very sweet. Story 10. People think money makes individuals unpleasant, but it just gives them the power to be who they really are. Individuals with less wealth can also be unpleasant. They just do not have the power to be. There are good, decent people at every level of wealth. I believe a combination of genetics, experiences, and upbringing plays a significant role in shaping who a person becomes. Sometimes people learn and change their ways. Sometimes good people become unkind when their faith in humanity is broken. We just never know. Story 11. An old college friend of my father became a multimillionaire. We visited his house for New Year's, and it was a mansion. His house was so large that I got lost wandering around it. He had an original painting in the entryway made by an artist who created a work for the Sistine Chapel near Michelangelo's. While we were admiring the painting, he looked at me and said, "Go ahead and touch it. When else do you get the opportunity to do that?" It was surreal to touch a painting likely worth more than I will ever earn in my lifetime. Story 12. I knew two very wealthy individuals. One of them donated a new library to a university, covering all the contents, staff salaries, and construction costs. It was just one of his many philanthropic deeds. His ex-wife hired me to be his daughter's chauffeur for skiing trips because the mother disliked sitting in the lodge waiting for her return, while also trying to stay sober. This man asked me to buy her a nice new car for her 16th birthday, so I purchased her a BMW. He was a genuinely nice person and easy to converse with. The other extremely wealthy individual owned 2 shipyards, 3 or 4 paper mills, an oil refinery, a shipping company, and around 150 gas stations, along with a large number of associated businesses. He was frugal and disconnected from the average person. He even had a turntable installed in his garage because his wife had trouble backing her car up. He never carried cash. Instead, he had someone else follow him around with the money. One day, he came into my shop and tried to negotiate a lower price on an elegant early 19th century Sheraton chest I had just finished restoring. I offered him a 5% discount on the 10% markup I had initially added when he arrived. Story 13. Their children were spoiled, and they would buy them pets, clothes, food, and golf lessons, hoping to awaken some sort of passion or drive in them, but it never worked. Story 14. Wary and paranoid about kidnapping or being taken advantage of, she shared her thoughts with me. At the time, we were in our 20s. She mentioned that inheritance passed only to grandchildren, not children, to reduce the chances of being killed by your kids for the money. It wasn't exactly a happy family. On the other hand, being part of the ruling class was absolutely central to her identity. It wasn't primarily about having money, but about belonging to a powerful family. Story 15. I worked for 2 brothers who started a roofing company. They struggled for a few years but became very successful when the entire county was hit by 2 major hailstorms. Within a year, they were multimillionaires. They paid themselves $30,000 per year while the company owned everything. Their houses, their cars, their wives' cars, their boats, and more. Then they mistreated everyone they encountered. Their employees, their suppliers, and their customers. Essentially anyone they owed anything to. They filed for bankruptcy, leaving behind nearly $2 million in debt and other obligations. They reopened the next day with the same buildings, the same trucks, and the same owners. The only changes were the employees and the company's name. I later learned they repeated this exact scheme at least 2 more times. Story 16. I know a family who is not merely wealthy. At one of their homes, they have their own private 9-hole golf course. They are genuinely generous people. They will wait on you while you are in their home and do not dress to impress. They ask questions about you and your family. When it's time to leave, they walk you to your car. You depart with a bottle of water, and they ensure you know how to get back to town since the house is remote. They support charitable causes with significant contributions. Story 17. My wife has a cousin who married a billionaire. They attended our wedding, and we see them and their children occasionally. They are nice people, easy to spend time with, and very low-key most of the time. Story 18. One of my close friends comes from a very wealthy background. I won't share details, but the family is still relatively down to earth. They don't flaunt their wealth any more than ordering from the second page of the wine list and perhaps being a little eccentric here and there. I've never seen them be pretentious or exhibit any attitude of superiority. On the contrary, they prefer to live a quieter life when socializing. I didn't realize how wealthy they were until I befriended her in school many years ago, and she asked if I'd like to go to the Isle of Wight. I said yes, and the next weekend I was in one of her family's helicopters for a day trip. During school, she was quite shy. Teenage girls can be very cliquey, and since she was quiet and only shared her living situation in French lessons, stating, "I live in a house with 8 bedrooms," she received some criticism for being a dreamer. I decided to befriend her, and as it turned out, she was telling the truth. The 8 bedrooms referred only to the main house. The annex and outhouse had an additional 3 bedrooms, and they owned 12 cars. When my old car broke down, she found out and dropped off the stable car, a 2014 Range Rover. It smelled of hay and horses, but I was told to use it as long as I needed. Story 19. My friend told me she didn't realize she was rich until she was taking the trash out one day as her new neighbors were moving in. She made it to the curb when she heard a friendly hello, and Patrick Stewart was right there. She nearly passed out because she is a huge Trekkie with the biggest crush on Jean-Luc Picard. She went back inside and asked her mom, "Are we rich?" When one of her parents passed, they left her over $20 million, and she'll get more than that when the other parent passes. As an only child, she and her children are set for life. Would you know she was rich? No. You'd think she had money, but not screw you money like she does. She's a lady of leisure who gets to do all the things nerds wish they could, like flying to London first class last minute just to go to a convention, attending all the meet and greets, and learning to play whatever instrument she's interested in. I didn't know she was rich until later in our friendship. She isn't a show-off, just a super cool mom friend. She used to work until she had her first baby, and while she only had an Associate of Science degree, she worked at the headquarters of a well-known alternative brand store. I'm happy for the beautiful life she has. She couldn't be a better person. I'm definitely the working-class friend in her group. My partner's boss was the founding partner at a law firm in Beverly Hills, and we started house-sitting his home in the Hollywood Hills when the bling ring break-ins were happening. He would also ask us to drive his brand new cars around because he didn't want the engines to stick while he was on vacation. He and his wife were nice, and they stocked the fridge with fancy versions of food we liked. This was over 10 years ago. Leonardo DiCaprio and Johnny Depp were some of his neighbors. Oh, and at his birthday party one year, Alan Rickman asked me if a seat was occupied near me and I almost died. Alan Rickman. Story 20. Incredibly nice and soft-spoken. They love animals and often hold charity events at their property. They have about 16 ex-racehorses living a carefree life because they couldn't stand the thought of what would happen to them otherwise. Just truly one of the nicest people you will ever meet. I know it sounds exaggerated, but I genuinely adore them and feel so lucky to call them my friend. Story 21. I attended a very affluent private school. My family was upper middle class, but I never felt any animosity. The extremely wealthy parents, which I realized later, never treated anyone differently. It is surprising how little I appreciated the disparity in homes, lifestyles, and situations. We truly did not understand it, and looking back, I cannot believe how privileged I was. Story 22. From the age of 18 to her mid-20s, my sister was very good friends with a wealthy girl from an old money family. Her parents were the type of people who are the true VIPs, known only to a select few in Portugal. They did not attend frivolous parties where the fake VIPs, who were actually broke, showcase borrowed clothes and jewelry. They would never have their faces printed in magazines like Hello. They only attended exclusive events that were completely off the public radar. My sister's friend was unaffected and did not seek to impress with expensive clothing. She mingled with all kinds of people. One day, my sister visited her home and was astonished, believing it was a somewhat normal apartment in a typical building, although located in the most exclusive part of the city. She soon realized it was actually 4 large apartments merged into one, making it a 2-story mansion. My sister described the long staircase and the decadent chandeliers, similar to those seen in movies. They had more than 2 staff members. When she met the parents, they were older than she expected. Though they were not extravagant, they were welcoming. When summer arrived, her friend invited my sister to spend a couple of weeks at their apartment in the south, a popular vacation destination. My sister accepted the invitation. It was a 3 to 3.5 hour drive, but they flew there in a 4-seater airplane owned by her friend's parents, with her friend's father as the pilot. Her friend later went to the United States to complete her education at one of the best colleges in New York, casually mentioning to my sister that she attended a party where she sat just a few seats away from John F. Kennedy Jr. and they talked. Her younger brother also studied in the United States, specifically at Harvard, and a few years later, he had secured a high-profile job on Wall Street. This was in the 1990s. Story 23. Have you heard of Dairy Queen? It is a franchised ice cream shop in the Midwest. They offer a Blizzard, which is soft serve with mix-ins, and I work for the family that patented it. The founder has since passed away, but his wife is still active, with a great sense of humor and kindness. She also is unaware of her wealth. She is a lovely lady. They have a Dairy Queen set up in their basement. Story 24. Usually very nice people. Perhaps 10 or 20% are difficult to deal with. However, they all seem to lose sight of how much better they have it compared to the rest of the world. Story 25. My mother's childhood friend married a multimillionaire. Every time we met him, he seemed really ordinary and genuine. He had inherited the money and spent his days doing whatever he wanted. He was into trains as a hobby and owned 2 that he would drive around on the 200 miles of private track he owned. So, maybe he was a bit different from the rest of us. Story 26. I have an uncle in his 80s who is a board member at a prestigious private college, where board seats cost $500,000 a year, and he has his name on a wing of the on-campus museum. He drives a Honda Pilot and gets a twinkle in his eye when I sit down with him to discuss the technical details behind OpenAI's latest advancements. As long as I adopt my explanatory tone suitable for semi-technical audiences, he follows perfectly and even makes some surprising intuitive leaps. Story 27. I have met many affluent, established families through training at the gym. Many were kind and occasionally mentioned something surprising about their other homes, travel experiences, or their first-world problems. Newly wealthy individuals often represent the least admirable kind of wealth. Story 28. Far and away the most common trait, to the degree that it almost radiates wealth, is interrupting. Interrupting everything, especially interrupting employees, like a waitress or a receptionist. I have worked both of those jobs and was raised in an affluent area that serves as a rural second home for celebrities in California. Story 29. I know a few business owners or former business owners. In almost all cases, they dislike discussing their wealth. They want to be treated like normal individuals and genuinely prefer not to have their financial status as a topic of conversation. I would argue they often do not realize how successful they are and struggle to acknowledge their achievements. I have also noticed a trend. In a self-made wealthy individual, there is an element of down-to-earth humility. It's almost as if they do not feel the need to show off their success. I would describe it as quiet confidence rather than shyness. This demeanor likely contributed to their success and others' willingness to work with them. Story 30. I am in Finland and knew several people through work who were among the top 500 earners in the country. They were nice people, some more than others, but there were no unpleasant individuals. Story 31. The mother of one of my good friends as a teenager was very wealthy but also very humble. You wouldn't know it until you visited their home. I came from a poor family, and it was clear she was aware of that but made sure to take care of me subtly during my visits. I dreamed of getting a pilot's license but knew I could never afford it. One day, My friend's mother asked me if I planned to take a lesson over the weekend and then presented me with a flight bag containing all the items I would need for flight school. She had also written a check to the instructor for the entire training cost. I earned my private pilot certification because of her, and despite my efforts to repay her over the years, she has not accepted it. Betsy, if you read this, you made my dream come true, and I am forever grateful for your generosity. Story 32. I know a woman who became wealthy from oil. I am not sure how, and I do not pry. She is incredibly generous and embodies what a Christian should be. Although I dislike that she goes on mission trips, which can be seen as modern-day colonialism, she constantly uses her resources to help others. She is quite lonely. Her husband passed away, and her children are not very kind to her. The other women at her church do not include her in activities. I think she may be too Christian for them. Additionally, she can be a bit exhausting to be around as she tends to be quite anxious. She is proof that money cannot buy friendship, but I wish her all the best. She earns 7 to 8 figures a year. While her house is large, I am somewhat surprised by how flimsy some of it is. Even large, expensive tract houses can be constructed from the cheapest materials. Story 33. I was in a mental health program for a month, and one of my fellow patients came from a wealthy family. His parents didn't provide him much nurture or life lessons, so he was manipulative, arrogant, and judgmental toward anyone who expressed emotion or cheerful traits. He aspired to be a popular songwriter, primarily in rap. One day, he overheard a commotion between another patient and me, then went out of his way to write hateful, distasteful lyrics about them. He then encouraged me to read them aloud while he recorded it. I felt uncomfortable and had enough of him. Unsurprisingly, he was discharged the next morning. Story 34. Most wealthy individuals are similar to others, with some being good and some bad. The primary difference is that their money enables them to engage in different activities and lifestyles that average people cannot access. Maintaining relationships across this divide can be challenging, as the issues faced by each group are often vastly different. Story 35. I attended an upscale preparatory school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was one of those schools often mentioned in popular culture. I was the only scholarship student brought in to diversify the student body. The students lived in a completely different world than I did. Some aspects of it were quite sad. I could sense that they envied the relationship I had with my parents, as many of them were raised by their nannies and barely knew their fathers and mothers. Whenever I got sick at school, my father would drive all the way from Queens to pick me up, and it became a spectacle. All the kids would come down to watch, and now, as an adult, I realize it was because they had never experienced that in their own lives. I'm not saying this applied to everyone, but a significant number were like that. Aside from that, we were all just kids. We wanted to play video games and tell jokes. They were friendly, and even though I couldn't afford many games, they would go out of their way to invite me over to play. There were a few difficult individuals, but that is typical everywhere. The funny part was that they would complain about having to go to Paris or Milan with their families for the summer or heading to the Hamptons for the weekend. Meanwhile, going to New Jersey seemed exotic to me. Story 36. I worked at a prestigious private school for a while, the type where foreign royalty sent their children. Here are a few things that stand out. I was in a dorm room talking with the other staff with a few students present. They started a conversation about whether they preferred their indoor or outdoor pools. In the same conversation, they also asked us which of our other houses we were going to for the holidays. Our response was, "We live here." One student had access to over 30 houses in different countries. Some of the students had no consideration for things that would be expensive for most people. I stepped on a MacBook Pro and broke the screen, as they had left it open in the hallway during class while I was carrying boxes. They shrugged it off and had 3 more delivered to them the next day. One for classes, one for personal use, and one as a spare in case another was broken. Not during my time there, but I heard that a parent requested to access the school via helicopter for a student sports tournament. The school declined the request as they couldn't accommodate it. They landed anyway and had a truckload of turf on standby in case the helicopter damaged the field. Story 37. My former boss had significant wealth. She inherited money, but she also built her own fortune by being savvy with real estate. She was the hardest working person I have ever met. I, in my 40s, could not keep up with her in her 60s. She is a genuinely fantastic person. I am richer for knowing her. Story 38. I grew up with wealthy beachfront parents. As an adult, I despised the rich. My parents and their friends treated everyone like servants. Story 39. All right, everyone. I was the regular server of a billionaire. I waited tables for 10 years and ended up at a Cajun restaurant and steakhouse called Nate's Seafood in Addison, Texas. You can look it up. It's this awful pink building with fake statues. I use a slash because it wasn't just Cajun food or a high-end steakhouse. It was a strange mix of both. The menu had $6.50 gumbo and $50 extravagant seafood plates or steaks. I became the regular server for a multi-billionaire. The man owned shopping malls. Every Wednesday, he would come in at 6 in his basic 2010 Corvette, order a gumbo, but not want it until 7. He would complain to management if you served it to him before 7. Why, you ask? 4 to 7 was happy hour. Gumbo was $1 off during happy hour, so his $6.50 gumbo was $5.50. He had been doing this for years. This man was inconceivably rich, yet he would complain to management about not saving his dollar. He tipped 25% every time, so I'm not too upset. But when you only spend $40 on a regular night out, it doesn't add up to much. I've come to terms with human greed since then. Story 40. One wealthy family I know acts very sweet. They are extremely hospitable. If you spend time with them, you would never feel like you are less wealthy than they are. However, when you hear them talk with other affluent individuals, you realize their wealth. They casually mention items, prices, or experiences you did not even know people spent money on. Yet, they actually have a sugary exterior with a sharp edge. Another affluent family I know has a similar level of wealth as the first one. However, if you visit their house and compare it to mine, you would think I am richer than they are, even though we are barely able to pay our bills. They are also very sweet and hospitable. Story 41. He seemed like a genuine person, but he lived a double life as a money launderer. He served time in prison and is still wealthy. Story 42. Berry Gordy, the owner of Motown Records, was someone I encountered frequently in everyday activities. He appeared to be a perfectly normal person, and nothing about him really stood out. In contrast, Michael Jackson was extremely sensitive, soft-spoken, and nice. Yet he carried an eccentricity in all aspects of his personality. Story 43. They have no understanding of life for those they consider poor. They blame others because they clearly did not work hard enough. Story 44. I have met a wealthy family involved in landscaping projects on their extensive property. The estate was so large that each family member had a house built on it, surrounded by a native forest and interconnected by paths. The elders of the family cherished their grandchildren, so they constructed a railway within the property to connect all the houses with a local train, allowing the children to visit just for fun to play and enjoy cookies. They moved around using helicopters and had pilots on site to assist with any needs. They were generous and kind people who loved sharing stories and showcasing their hobbies and affection for their grandchildren. Story 45. I have a friend who is likely a multimillionaire, although an exact number has never been discussed. He is older and has worked his way up to a very high position. He is kind and thoughtful, and we have had many thought-provoking conversations. We met on a dance floor and became friends through our love of music. I remember one time he told me that money doesn't bring happiness, but it does bring freedom, and that has always stuck with me. Story 46. The most accurate takeaway from White Lotus is that these individuals and their families primarily discuss their favorite resorts. Story 47. I attended a prestigious university, Oxford, so I met quite a few people with generational wealth. It was a mixed experience. Some were unpleasant, while many were kind individuals. However, nearly all of them were out of touch in significant ways, which is somewhat inevitable. I remember one friend asking me why I was renting after graduation and telling me it was a waste of money, suggesting that buying a house would be much better. I replied, "But I can't afford to buy a house." and she responded, "Well, why don't you ask your parents? That's what I did. And my dad bought a house for me." The truth is, she genuinely didn't realize that this was not a practical solution. Because, of course, everyone has parents who can simply buy them a house upon graduation. Story 48. They own 5 houses, including a large winery in California, and believe they are middle class. Story 49. My dentist owns a luxury car, a sailboat, and a beautiful home on several acres of country land. His wife was also a dentist and is now retired. He co-owned his group practice until he discovered that his accountant had betrayed him. He remains one of the kindest and gentlest people I know. Story 50. They are family friends. My grandma said they are distant relatives, but I am not sure. Can you imagine how stingy someone must be? Everyone knows they are millionaires, yet they never spend a dime. Going out shopping at the mall is a luxury. They are so extreme that their own children did not realize they were wealthy until later on. Story 51. I live in a very wealthy town where celebrities and people from both new and old money live and vacation. It honestly depends on the person. There is a family I know who has old money, close to billionaires, and they are the nicest people I know. They are down to earth and generous. Some of the sons have opened restaurants in town, and I hear they are wonderful to work for. There are many folks like this here, and often they are the ones with outreach foundations, contributing money to the community. I have also worked with extremely wealthy corporate owners, and typically they are really cool but much less down to earth than they think. They often believe they can relate to me but definitely cannot. However, they are kind and generous. Often, these individuals are into the latest health trends and drive nice but older cars, choosing not to switch them out every year. They do not have foundations, but they pay their employees well, and the wives volunteer their time to start green programs and donate money through giving circles. Then there are the new and old money types, typically vacationers or people who come in and out of town. These individuals are often the most unpleasant people you will ever meet. I have been at a 4-way stop where everyone forces themselves to go before me because they are in an expensive car while I'm in my beat-up Prius. I waited for several cars before anyone let me in. It was quite frustrating. It definitely depends on the person and how they got there. Story 52. I wasn't born into wealth but became very exposed to it in college. I broke up with a billionaire at one point. They are the same. It's interesting and depressing. The same problems and the same people exist. Occasionally, you encounter some unpleasant individuals, but generally, the wealthier you become, the less this is an issue. They are just normal people. For the reader's reference, billionaires and heirs to multi-billion-dollar trusts come from names you would all recognize, including various celebrities. Money does not change much, and that realization is both liberating and depressing. Story 53. The best way I can describe it is that they are flat. It feels like they do not connect to anything and are constantly looking for the next handbag or the next restaurant. They also create small dramas, such as when someone does not serve them correctly. A wealthy French lady sat me down to lecture me because her 5-year-old, who was learning English from me, said, "See you next week" instead of "next week." I thought it was hilariously creative, but I had to hear that they come from a literary family and that jokes like that are not acceptable. Story 54. I have met over 500 million high net worth individuals, and what I have noticed is that one is never satisfied. They have money, so they are trying to acquire something else. Examples include proving that they can successfully start another company and that the first one wasn't just a fluke, cultivating more influence than they already have, and associating with famous people. Story 55. Very cheap, materialistic, entitled, paranoid, and dishonest. Believed everyone was out to get them and felt entitled to respect merely because they owned substantial property. Engaged in predatory lending practices and targeted economically vulnerable individuals, including their own distant relatives. In another instance, my previous landlord was extremely wealthy, owning more than 20 houses and an upscale bungalow. He was very frugal, refusing to pay for repairs and maintenance. He fought over a deposit so small that I would never even consider it if I had that kind of money. Story 56. I was around a multimillionaire who was quiet during employee night, while his wife talked the whole evening. They left early, which made me feel like we were too low to be spoken to. He seemed uninterested in engaging with the workers, as if he didn't want to care about us. Interestingly, the wife discussed their children attending private schools, mentioning that they would drive an hour for the kids to attend, as well as their multiple houses and upcoming vacation trips. Story 57. In the early 2000s, I became friends with someone whose father, unbeknownst to me, was the founder of one of the biggest information technology companies in the world. I had no idea until more than a decade after we met, and it was completely random that I found out. He rented a very nice apartment, but other than that, there was nothing to indicate he had generational wealth compared to merely being wealthy. Overall, he was one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Story 58. I have worked for high net worth individuals and still have quite a few as my clients. They are people like any other, with their problems, insecurities, drama, and challenges. Two very famous people who you have seen on television were my clients, and let me tell you, they are nothing special in person. That being said, I had one boss who threw around money like it was nothing. He told me to take about $500,000 in signed checks to his investment firm, and he barely knew me. I did it and realized that I had more money in my hands than most people in the world would ever see in their lifetime. It was strange. Story 59. I shared a living space with a humble and kind individual for a brief period. I only realized he was wealthy when I saw his passport while we were discussing unusual pictures. I believe he noticed my reaction when I recognized his family name, but we didn't discuss it further since he went by a less conspicuous name. I'm unsure if he had unrestricted access to significant financial resources, but his relatives could purchase anything. Story 60. Netherlands. I have been close to quite a few millionaires over the years, and as a tax consultant, I had several clients in that category as well. I observed basically two types. One, the type that is silent about their financial wealth. This is ingrained in Dutch society, which values modesty about wealth. These individuals cultivate this trait. They live in nice homes, drive nice cars, wear nice clothes, and engage in personal growth activities such as traveling and studying, leading a well-rounded life. They do not break the law for monetary gain and respect the spirit of the law. They often donate substantial amounts to charity without making a fuss about it. I know about it because we were close and it came up in conversation, or because I handled their administration. These are nice people who realize their luck, even if some worked very hard for it. Part of Dutch culture is being aware of how much luck is involved in becoming wealthy, whether through hard work or inheritance. They are just regular individuals, but their wealth, humility, and generosity are inspiring to me. The type that is vocal about their financial wealth. In Dutch society, many consider these individuals narcissistic or sociopathic. They live in the most expensive homes, drive luxury cars, wear designer clothes, and are generally not interested in personal growth, but rather in acquiring status and fame. They might break the law for monetary gain if they think they can get away with it or invest in unethical ventures. They seize every opportunity to flaunt their wealth and, with false humility, keep mentioning their charitable donations. When mingling with the lower classes, it is primarily for attention. They perceive those as wealthy as vaguely equal and are often jealous of those who are more affluent. Relationships are transactional and focused on opportunities rather than genuine connections, and they attribute all their success to themselves. I have had serious arguments with such individuals when I pointed out that they reached their status at least partially due to luck. They often exhibit entitlement and have poor self-esteem and self-awareness. In both my private and professional life, I stay far away from these people, as they can be shallow and willing to exploit others if it benefits them and they believe they can escape consequences. These represent two ends of a continuum, but most people seem to be at or close to one of the extremes. Story 61. I attended a private school, so I ended up with a fair number of wealthy friends. The millionaires were a mixed group. Some were nice, while most were unpleasant. The billionaires, though, all had their quirks but were generally quite relaxed. Story 62. My brother-in-law is a billionaire, a self-made man who built his own empire. Fortunately, he is an incredibly generous and humble gentleman. He and my sister give far more than their fair share to charities and are engaged in civic movements that benefit everyone. At the family level, he takes a sincere interest in what is happening in everyone's lives and is a great husband and father. Story 63. Calm, frugal, impressive. Very unassuming and far less judgmental than I expected. We are rich. These people were wealthy, like flying on their own private jets wealthy. Story 64. One of my cousins is a multimillionaire because of selling K2 a long time ago. I worked for him, and in the end, he refused to pay for a work trip he demanded I take with him, which destroyed our friendship. I quit, and eventually he apologized and admitted he was being stingy. I worked for him again years later, and he paid over $1 less per hour than he promised. I quit again. I'm not going to work for minimum wage for my millionaire cousin. At this point, I have written him off. Story 65. I was working for him at an agriculture company. He kept insisting that I should be more sociable with his daughters, who were 10 years younger and had their own friends. He ended up really disliking me because I wasn't interested in becoming closer to them. Story 66. Had a 2-story beachfront luxury home. The kids weren't allowed upstairs except to eat. Their bedrooms, playroom, and bathroom were all downstairs with their nanny. Story 67. I went to graduate school with a young woman who grew up living in her family's hotels. Her family owned hotels in several large cities around the world. Part of the college curriculum included projects in and around London, as our college was in the United States. We stayed in 2- and 3-star hotels during our trips, while she stayed in her family's luxury hotel. She would often visit Paris to see friends. She was one of the most grounded, confident, friendly, and caring individuals I have ever known. Story 68. My family owns a few nice properties and has no financial struggles. We have a fund that my parents often mention when they feel like it. They often remind me that what I have and what I am able to do is not a typical experience. Instead of enrolling me in private schools like the neighbor's children, they put me in public school. I was a rebellious child, so when I turned 15, I chose to experience poverty firsthand. My parents love me, but their affection feels very conditional. I married my husband, who represents new wealth. My family is shocked by his behavior and spending, but they also respect him for his hard work and impressive educational background. He holds a doctorate and 2 master's degrees in separate fields. Everyone thinks I am crazy for wanting to teach elementary school in a rough neighborhood, but that's acceptable since I am a woman. I find myself navigating these 3 conflicting worlds, each with its own challenges. I miss my previous struggles. These rich person problems are much harder to resolve. Story 69. My dad went to high school and is great friends with the man who inherited one of the most popular shopping malls in America, where people with serious international money fly in to shop, and they even have currency exchanges. He and his family have been nothing but nice to me in our few interactions and seem like perfectly normal people. Of course, when I found out as a child that he owns one of George Harrison's cars and the original Austin Powers car, I realized we were playing entirely different games. However, that never really changed my opinion of him. Story 70. I know a couple of multimillionaires, and they are all pretty nice, but my favorite is the sweetest and kindest man I have ever known. Story 71. One of my best friends is the son of 2 very influential musicians in his home country. We're talking about someone who would own a mansion in Los Angeles and a private airport, kind of rich. He went to school in California and is a marine biologist, but he got sick, so he switched careers temporarily and now teaches music while owning his own music school and production studio. The only thing his parents paid for was his education. Honestly, he is the most down-to-earth guy I've ever met. He would give you the shirt off his back, even if it meant he would be drenched in rain. He always tries to find a way to help people. He helped a friend start a business and invested in him, and now they co-own the business together. I ended up working with him for a while because he offered me a teaching position. We worked together for about 2 to 3 years before a fire ripped through the old studio in school, which started when the bakery next door caught fire, taking down the entire strip mall with it. I lost all my equipment that I had been storing there due to a move, and he helped me navigate insurance. Whatever the insurance didn't cover, he bought for me. He acts just like any regular person living his best life, and I'm proud to call him a friend. Story 72. It's a mixed situation. Some think they are above everyone, but most are just regular people like everyone else. I grew up in a very small school with mostly the children of music executives and successful recording artists. My dad's best friend was the son of an extremely successful artist. I spent a lot of time at friends' houses and my dad's friend's family compound. These people were very wealthy, and all but one family were just normal people. That family is still very famous, and people are fascinated by them. I just thought they were rude when I was a kid. Story 73. My friend from school became wealthy, with a collection of supercars and a villa in the mountains of Switzerland, yet he remains a genuinely nice and modest person. However, he has no life outside of work. Story 74. My aunt owns an airline, and her husband owns a hockey team. They were late for Thanksgiving dinner one time because they had to do a lap around the city in their private plane because the view was too beautiful to pass up. We all originally bet on why she was late, and I was right. Her jet was delayed as she lives 2 hours away. Story 75. Some individuals are very nice, while others can be quite rude. I have encountered some minor nobility in the United Kingdom who were wealthy and lovely, but also snobbish about certain matters. I have also met individuals from affluent backgrounds who were simply wonderful. I must say, the most unpleasant type of wealthy people I have encountered are those who inherited their wealth without having to work for it at all. Many wealthy individuals inherited family businesses, but their parents made them put in the effort to excel at their jobs. In contrast, some people simply came into millions due to the passing of a parent and never really had to strive, and they can be insufferable. Story 76. Very down to earth. I used to service a client who owns multiple housing communities, including apartment complexes, townhouses, and commercial properties. He always asked if I wanted water, and since he was usually my last stop of the day, he often invited me to dinner with his family. Story 77. I have had two friends, not close friends, but friends who went on to be very successful and wealthy. They were down-to-earth, normal people, but the money gradually changed their mindset. We are no longer friends. There is something about wealth and success that can be hard to resist. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.